Hi everyone, welcome to Introduction to Creative Writing, Module 1, Poetry 1. Here are some notes on your textbook reading for this week and some thoughts as you begin. First off, I want to let you know that I agree 100% with the textbook in the fact that Dr. Starkey says creative writing just might be the best subject to study ever. It certainly is my favorite for sure. When it comes to the field of English, I've taught a lot of different areas in that field, within that field, and I've taught a lot of different ages of students. But quite honestly, teaching creative writing is definitely my very, very favorite topic to teach, my very favorite skill to work with writers on. The creative side is definitely where I enjoy being the most. The second point is that everyone has the capacity to write, to learn to write better, and to gain help from a writing class. Some people are born more talented than others, but everyone can be taught. And you might want to note that on pages 2 and 3 of your text, it says that not everyone has always believed this. And I think a lot of people in the world kind of have this idea that either you're born a writer or you're not born a writer. And there's just two options, and there's no in between. But I really believe that there is a lot that can be gained from just taking the time to become better writers. So I'm really happy that you're here. I'm happy that you've taken the step, no matter where you're at in your journey as a writer. I'm glad you've taken this step to potentially learn and become a better writer right from where you are. If you have a love of writing, you have enough. Don't worry about your level of talent. Don't worry about your level of experience. Just be here to write. Be here to learn, to make it your practice, and let your writing find its place in this world. Number 3, the best way to learn about writing is to do it. We hear all the time about writer's block, and people have this huge looming fear of writer's block. Writer's block will happen, but some people have magnified this common and cyclical part of a writer's practice into this behemoth of a monster that stops them from writing anything at all. Before you start writing anything at all for this class, realize that you'll probably be blocked at some time. We all are. We all get blocked, no matter how experienced we are as writers. Realize that that's going to happen, but you need to still keep trying. The payoff will be there. Write through it. Always. Always come back to the page or the screen. Don't give up. I think one of the biggest things that people have to understand is that you are going to have some junky, crappy first drafts. That's just how it is. On the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about process. But what we have to talk about when we talk about writer's block is this idea that the first draft has to be perfect and that it has to come out right and that it has to be beautiful. And that's just not the case. First drafts just, unless you're having some magic stroke of genius or this flash of inspiration that's, once in a decade, your first draft is just not going to come out beautifully necessarily. So be ready for that. Know that that's a reality. And just know that this is how we do it. We go in and we write a first draft, and then we come back and we work on it from there. In this class, we're actually going to work in relatively short forms. So that's easier for beginning writers. Reaching completion is easier when you're working with short forms. So hopefully that will give you a little bit of help if you are worried about writer's block. Number 4, writing is a process. As I mentioned in the previous slide, don't feel married to your first draft. Let it move, let it change. Everyone's process is different, and this process can take days, weeks, or months. Now, obviously, in this class, we don't necessarily have, we may have days, but we don't always have weeks, and we definitely don't have a lot of months. So again, that's why we write in quite short forms for this class. But I do want you to just have it set in your mind before we even start that writing is a process and that your process is going to develop. You're going to learn more about your own process as a writer. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my revision process and how I work, how I've come to work as a writer when I revise. Like I said before, I am always ready for a really junky, crappy first draft. When I write a first draft, it's like the first part of a drawing where the lines are there, but you can't really tell what it is that the artist is drawing. They're just there. They're black and white on the page. You can't for sure see what is actually happening. It's very bare bones, usually images, some vague ideas of who the characters are, or the beginnings of a place or a world. But then I go back, and the next part of the process is to start to layer in more details, more sharp details, more ideas that create a sharper sense of the world we're in, of what's happening in that world, of the images in that world, of who the people are that are moving through that world. So this is a long process. You're going to see I have posted a video in the study resources for this module, and it's a video of an artist using watercolors to paint an eye, and that's the idea that I'm talking about in terms of process here. You start with just a few lines, a few basic guiding ideas that bring about a shape, and then you go back in and you layer in, like the artist layers in color and layers in detail and layers in shading and layers in all the tools that artists use to create a visual picture. That's what we do in words, and it is a process. It is not a one-time flash of genius on the page or on the screen. I'd suggest that you carefully read and maybe even reread the section titled "A Few Words About Revision" on pages 9 through 13 in your textbook. Number 5, read and read and read some more. It will give you an idea of the beautiful variations of voice out in the world, all the different ways to tell your story, and to help your own voice emerge in your writing. I think everyone coming into this class probably has a good idea of what type of poetry or short stories or essays they like to read. You probably know what your favorites are. I would challenge you to start to learn to read outside of your favorites. I have learned to do this. This took some learning for me, but now I really, as I'm a little further along in my writing journey, I've found that as a writer, I really enjoy reading a broad spectrum of types of things. So, for example, right now I'm going to just tell you a little bit of what I'm reading. I am reading books by a writer named Lydia Yuknavitch and another writer named Rebecca Solnit. Both of them are very unstructured and experimental in their writing. They are definitely what we would call avant-garde, or very, just very, very contemporary. Not the type of thing that you would necessarily see. Their plots don't necessarily move from one point to the next logically like we're used to seeing, and yet they have this way of creating a story and creating these characters and these worlds that you want to stick with. So that's one end of the spectrum, but I'm also reading all the way on the other end of the spectrum writers like Gillian Lauren and Claire Bedwell Smith, who are they're memoir writers, and they write very traditionally structured memoirs with a traditional narrative arc, traditional plotting. And I think reading on both ends of the spectrum gives me a broad scope to kind of draw from as far as my ability to find my own place and my own voice. So reading and reading and reading some more can really inform your writing. Along with reading, number 6, your writing will benefit from talking with others. You know, we hear people say all the time, find your tribe. That's kind of the lingo right now. It's a common phrase that you'll hear. I think as a writer, you can go out in the world and find lots of different tribes. I've got several at this point. I've got my writing group. There's 4 of us that get together for a once a month conference call about our writing, and that's one tribe that I have. And then I have some other groups that I meet with periodically or that I'm in touch with on Facebook, or but it's taken some time to develop those relationships. So you still have to do the writing, of course, but your writing will benefit from talking about it with others. Being in community and talking with other writers will help your work and theirs significantly. Once you begin to see yourself as a writer, you have to start to see yourself as something you are part of something larger than yourself. You're part of a global conversation, even. And if you see that, then you start to understand the importance of your craft in your practice. Even if you're just doing it for fun, you're still bringing something to the world that no one else can bring. And in order to put it out there, you need to become part of the community. Your first step, well, maybe some of you are already part of that community in other ways. Maybe this is just an additional step for you. Maybe for some of you, this is your first introduction to the world of creative writing, and this is your first tribe or your first community or your first chance to benefit from talking with others. So as we get started and as we start communicating with each other, sharing our writing, sharing our thoughts, I would just really urge you to find the benefit in talking with others about your writing. Number 7, reading and writing are social activities. This comes kind of from the last slide we talked about. My life and writing are broadened and enriched by the communities that I'm a part of. I would encourage you to start to see things the same way if you don't already see them that way. Be conscious that you're part of something larger than yourself, and your writing is your contribution to that. Allow the same for others. Allow others to make their contribution in their way as well. If at first their writing doesn't resonate for you, always give it a second chance. There are things now that I read that resonate with me that maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, maybe those things didn't resonate with me the same way. Maybe I wouldn't have even picked them up. There are things that resonated with me 10 years ago, 5 years ago that I'm not particularly interested in anymore. The reading and the writing that we do is always moving. It's always in flux. It's always changing. And again, it's part of a larger artistic community and activity in this world. And I hope that you can see it that way. Those are some really big global ideas and some big idealistic ideas. This next slide kind of goes to an idea that is more practical. Number 8, conventions are important. By conventions, we're talking about the readability of your text. I've talked a little bit about experimental writers and that I enjoy reading them. But even the experimental writers that I read, there is some sort of order to their text. Yes, they may write in fragments, and yes, they may make up words sometimes and do some kind of crazy things with language, but they have made it their goal to continue to keep the words and the sentences and the text as a whole readable. So realize that you do have to create readable drafts. You can't misspell words or just randomly create mistakes for no reason. There has to be reason behind your just the way that you structure things and the way that you do things, and be willing to go back through and just do the basic proofreading to make sure everything is spelled right, to make sure you're turning in a clean copy so that whoever's reading your work can deal with it effectively. And finally, number 9, remember that when others, including me, assess your work, which we're going to be doing because we're going to be workshopping with each other, we're all coming from our own aesthetics, our own sense of what resonates. And like I mentioned before, we all have a fluctuating sense of aesthetic, things that we like now, maybe that we didn't like before, things that we didn't like before that maybe we're drawn to now. Don't be surprised to get feedback that differs greatly from your own impressions on your work. Be open to that. Learn from it. Here's a good example. In my writing group, my friend Sandy Yang is an excellent writer of very plot driven work. Her short stories have the greatest plots. I struggle when I write short stories to keep plot moving forward. I'm much more someone who enjoys developing character, developing setting and world, and creating something that's very full in its rendering as far as the world goes. Now, sometimes my stories run the risk of not having a lot happening if I'm not careful. So when Sandy reads my work, her plot driven aesthetic will find things that I don't even think are there, that I don't even know are there, that problems that I don't realize are there. And because I know her and because I know her strengths, I really trust her to give me feedback that helps me with that particular weakness. So as we begin to workshop together, as the class gets going, realize that you're going to be working with people whose aesthetic might be a little bit different than you, whose strengths might be a little different than you, who will probably see the good in your writing, but they will also be able to see some areas where maybe it could be stronger. And I hope that you can see that as a positive thing, and I hope that you can look forward to gaining a lot from that. Just to wrap things up, I just want to share a little story with you. I have a friend who always tells me that she isn't a runner, and yet I run with her almost every day at the gym. And so I am constantly telling her, you are a runner. You run, therefore, you are a runner. Now, some of you may have come in to this class thinking, already feeling like you are a writer, and that's fantastic. But there may be some of you out there who don't feel like you're already a writer. Maybe you don't already consider yourself a writer. And if that's the case, I really want to challenge you and urge you to start considering yourself, call yourself a writer. If you write, you are a writer. You're going to be writing during this semester in this class. It's going to make you a writer. You are a writer. You write, therefore, you're a writer. Now, thanks for being here with me, and on to poetry.